I walked to the front of that church on a Saturday morning in May, and I whispered 6 words into the bride's ear. And those 6 words made her go completely still in a way that I had never seen a person go still before. Not from shock, not from anger, but from the specific quality of someone who has just received information that rearranges every assumption they have been standing on. The organist had stopped playing. The officiant had taken a step back. My father was standing 3 feet away watching his 17-year-old daughter lean toward his bride and say something that he could not hear, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen from him before. Not anger, not the quiet disappointment he had been directing at me for 2 years, but fear. The specific fear of a parent who suddenly, in one unguarded moment, understands that something has been happening that they did not see, and that the not seeing has produced a consequence they cannot predict. What I whispered to Diane Cooper on the morning of her wedding to my father was this: he has been paying for my mother's cancer treatment for 8 months. She is going to be okay. 6 words that took me 8 months to find out. 6 words that changed the shape of everything I had believed about the man standing at that altar. 6 words that I had driven 61 miles to say, because they needed to be said before Diane Cooper walked the last 3 feet to the altar beside my father without understanding what kind of man she was walking beside. But before I can tell you what those words meant, and why they mattered and what happened after I said them, I need to take you back. All the way back to when I was 15 and my parents sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me they were separating, and the world I had built my entire understanding of everything on shifted in a way that I would spend 2 years trying to make myself not feel. My name is Imani Adiz Osai Morgan. I am 17 years old. My mother is Dr. Cynthia Osai, and my father is James Edward Morgan, and they were married for 16 years before the separation, and the three of us lived in a house in the Cascade neighborhood of Atlanta that I loved with the specific completeness of a child who has never known a home she did not love. The kitchen had yellow walls. The backyard had a fig tree my grandmother planted before I was born. My father coached my youth basketball team until I was 12 and taught me to drive his truck in the empty parking lot of a church 2 Sundays before he moved out and called me his compass, which was the thing he said when he wanted me to understand that I was the direction he found himself by. He called me that last on a Tuesday in October 2 years ago, sitting across from me at the kitchen table while my mother sat beside me with the specific stillness of a woman who has processed her grief privately and completely before bringing it to this table. "Your mother and I are separating," he said. And then, "You are my compass, Imani. That does not change." I was 15 years old and I nodded because nodding was what I could do without breaking. And then I went to my room and I sat on the floor between my bed and the wall, and I felt the specific profound loss of a world that had been whole, and was now two separate things that both needed me to be okay about it. I was not okay about it. I got good at performing okay. The separation became a divorce in the spring of the year I turned 16. It was not acrimonious in the visible sense. My parents were civil to each other. The lawyers handled the practical matters efficiently, and the custody arrangement was structured around my school schedule and my activities in a way that suggested both of them were prioritizing my stability. What was not prioritized in the 2 years that followed was my father's understanding of who I was becoming in the middle of all of it. This is the part of the story that I need you to understand because it is the foundation of everything that happened at the church. When my parents were married and my family was whole, my father was present in the way that fathers who are present are present. The basketball coaching and the truck driving lesson and the calls me his compass way of being a father that I had accepted as the baseline of what fathers were. When the separation happened and his presence became a visitation schedule and a Wednesday dinner and a custody pickup on alternate weekends, something shifted that I do not think he fully understood was shifting. Not his love for me. I want to say that clearly because it is true and because the story requires truth even when the truth is complicated. He loved me. He has always loved me. That is not what shifted. What shifted was his fluency in me. The specific daily literacy of a parent who lives in the same house as their child and who accumulates, through the ordinary friction of shared morning routines, and dinner conversations and homework arguments and small victories and small disappointments, a detailed and current understanding of who that child is. When the visitation schedule replaced the shared house, that literacy began to fade not because he stopped trying but because the trying happened in concentrated weekend doses rather than in the continuous ordinary accumulation that builds the full picture. I became, over 2 years, slightly unfamiliar to my father. He did not know this was happening. I did not know how to tell him. And into the space created by that mutual not knowing came Diane Cooper. Diane Cooper. She was 38 years old when my father introduced her to me on a Sunday in September, 15 months after the separation. She was a marketing director at a technology company. She was warm in the specific professional way of someone who is good with people, and who had extended that professional warmth into the project of getting to know her boyfriend's daughter. She was not a bad person. I want to say that because it is true and because the story requires it. She was not the villain of my life. She was a woman who had met a man she liked, and who was doing what people do when they meet people they like, which was building toward something, and the building required navigating the daughter of the man's previous marriage with care and good intentions. Her care was genuine. Her good intentions were real. What she did not know, because my father did not know and therefore could not tell her, was what I needed the navigating to look like. What I needed was for my father to see me, not the performed okay version of me that I had been offering for 2 years. The actual version, the version that was grieving the yellow kitchen and the fig tree and the specific completeness of a family that had been whole, and that was doing so in the particular internal way of a teenager who has decided that the adults in her life have enough to manage without her grief being added to the pile. Instead, over the 15 months between Diane's arrival and the May wedding, what I got was the progressive replacement of the conversation space my father and I had shared with a new geometry, one where Diane was present in ways that were warm and well-intentioned, and that gradually, without anyone deciding this, became the primary relationship in the room, and I became the adjacent one. I have thought about this progression many times. I have thought about whether it was Diane's doing or my father's, or simply the physics of what happens when a man who has lost his family builds a new one, and the child of the previous family finds herself repositioned without anyone quite understanding that the repositioning is happening. What I know is that by January of this year, 4 months before the wedding, I had stopped telling my father things, not because he asked and I refused, because the asking had stopped feeling reliable, because the conversations we had on Wednesday evenings and alternate weekends had become the specific, pleasant, surface-level exchanges of two people who love each other and who have lost the fluency to go deeper. Because every time I arrived at the edge of saying something true, something in the architecture of our relationship as it now existed told me the space for it was not there. I was 17 years old and I had stopped talking to my father. He did not know this had happened. And then my mother got sick, January 14th. I know the date because dates matter when they carry certain kinds of weight. My mother told me on a Tuesday evening after dinner. We were doing dishes together, the comfortable, companionable rhythm of two people who have been doing dishes together long enough that the rhythm requires no conversation to maintain. And she turned off the faucet and dried her hands, and turned to me with the specific expression of a woman who has chosen the moment carefully because the moment needs to be right. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 2. Her oncologist was optimistic about the treatment outcomes. She would need surgery and chemotherapy and radiation over approximately 8 months. She wanted me to know before anything else happened that she was going to be okay. She said those words, "I am going to be okay." And she said them in the voice of a woman who had already looked at the statistics and the options and the treatment plan and the doctor's assessment, and had arrived at a considered belief rather than a performed reassurance. I believed her. I also felt, in the specific way that a 17-year-old feels things that they do not yet have the language for, that the floor had dropped out of the world a second time in 2 years. I stood at the kitchen sink in the house that had yellow walls, and I felt the specific weight of what it would mean if she were wrong about being okay. I felt the weight of what it meant to be 17 and to have your mother, the parent who had been your primary home for 2 years, facing something that required all of her reserves at the same time that you were 17 and requiring reserves of her own. I said, "What do you need from me?" She said, I need you to keep going. School, basketball, your life. I need you to not let this become the thing you organize your entire self around. I said, okay. She said, and I need you to not tell your father yet. I looked at her. She said, I know that is complicated. I am going to tell him myself in my own time, in my own way. He is going to be involved in the treatment process financially and otherwise, but I want to be the one to have that conversation. Will you give me that? I said, yes. I kept her secret for 8 months, which is the same amount of time she was in treatment, which is the same amount of time I spent going to school and playing basketball and visiting my father on alternate weekends, and sitting at Diane's dinner table, making conversation about my junior year plans, while my mother was receiving chemotherapy in a treatment center 20 minutes from our house. I kept the secret because my mother asked me to, and because keeping it was what she needed, and because I am her daughter, and she is my compass the way my father used to be. And I was not going to take from her the control she needed over her own story. What the keeping cost me is the part of this story I need you to feel. The keeping cost me the last genuine connection I had to my father. Because in the 8 months that I was carrying my mother's secret, in the 8 months that I was sitting in my father's house and my father's car and my father's new life, while the most important thing happening in my actual life was locked behind a promise I had made to my mother. In those 8 months, my father and Diane got engaged. He proposed in February. He told me the following Saturday on our drive to brunch, the alternate weekend routine that had become our version of quality time, with the specific careful warmth of a man who understood that this news was significant for his daughter and who had prepared what he thought was the right way to deliver it. He said he loved Diane. He said he was happy. He said she was good for him in ways he had needed. He said he hoped I would come to love her too. He said I was still his compass. I sat in the passenger seat of his truck, the same truck we had practiced driving in when I was 15, and I felt the specific vertigo of someone who is holding something so large inside them that there is no room for anything new and who is being asked to receive something new anyway. I said, "I'm happy for you, Dad." I said it in the voice of a person performing okay. He believed me because he had been believing that performance for 2 years, and because he did not have the daily fluency in me anymore to know the difference. We went to brunch. I ate pancakes. I kept the secret. The wedding was scheduled for May the 23rd. I found out in March, 2 months before, that my father had been contributing to my mother's treatment costs. Not from my mother, who kept the financial arrangements between them private and would not have broken that privacy. Not from my father, who I had stopped having conversations with that went past the surface. I found out because I found the bank statement, not on purpose, not through any intention to look. I was visiting my father's apartment on an alternate weekend in March, looking for the charger I had left there on my last visit, and I opened the wrong kitchen drawer. the one beside the one where chargers and miscellaneous cables lived, and found a small folder of papers, and my eye, in the specific automatic way that eyes catalog what they see before the brain has decided whether to look, registered the familiar name at the top of the first page: Georgia Cancer Treatment Center. The name of the facility where my mother was receiving treatment. I should have closed the drawer. I took out the papers. I read them. What I found was a payment history. 8 months of payments, consistent and significant, from my father's personal account to the Georgia Cancer Treatment Center, designated for the treatment of Dr. Cynthia Osai. 8 months, which meant he had known from the beginning, which meant my mother had told him, in her own time, in her own way, as she had promised herself she would, and that he had responded in the specific way of a man who loved the mother of his child even after the marriage was over, which was quietly and without announcement, and with the specific practical love of someone who does not require credit for doing what needs to be done. I stood in my father's kitchen with those papers in my hands for a very long time. I thought about the 2 years. I thought about the alternate weekends and the Wednesday dinners and the surface-level conversations and the engagement announcement in the truck. I thought about the ways I had stopped telling him things and the ways he had stopped knowing the things I was not telling him. I thought about the specific grief of watching your family become two separate things and spending 2 years performing okay about it, while the not okay part built up in the spaces the performing didn't reach. And I thought about the fact that this man, who I had decided didn't fully see me anymore, who I had decided had repositioned me in his life to make room for someone new, had been paying for my mother's cancer treatment for 8 months, quietly, without my knowing, without asking for my knowing, because it was the right thing to do and because he was going to do the right thing whether I knew about it or not. I put the papers back in the drawer. I found my charger. I went home. I need you to subscribe to Black Diamonds right now. Before this story goes one more word forward, hit that bell. Because what I am about to tell you about the weeks between finding that bank statement and walking into that church is the part of this story that matters most. The part where a 17-year-old girl figures out something about her father that completely rearranges everything she thought she understood about the last 2 years. Subscribe. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever misjudged someone you loved because the pain of missing them made it easier to believe they had stopped seeing you. This community is here for this story. All of it. Now come back to March. Come back to me standing in that kitchen with a payment history in my hands. I spent 6 weeks after finding the bank statement in a specific internal process that I do not have a single word for, but that felt like the simultaneous dismantling and rebuilding of a picture I had been maintaining for 2 years. The picture I had been maintaining was this. My father had separated himself from our old life and was building a new one, and in the building had gradually, without intending to, moved me to the periphery of his full attention. This picture was not entirely wrong. The loss of fluency was real. The repositioning was real. The surface-level conversations were real. But what the picture had missed, what I had not known to put in it because the information had been hidden from me by a promise I had made to my mother, was the payment history. And the payment history changed the picture completely. Because a man who pays for his ex-wife's cancer treatment for 8 months without announcement, without credit, without requiring the knowledge of the daughter he has been imperfectly navigating a difficult 2 years with, that man is not someone who has stopped seeing. That is someone who is still showing up in the specific ways that matter, even when the showing up is invisible to the people it is for. He was still my father. He had been my father the whole time. I had been so deep in the grief of what had changed that I had stopped seeing what had not. I sat with that for 6 weeks. Then, in the last week of April, 4 weeks before the wedding, I tried to talk to him. I want to tell you about that attempt because it is the part of the story that is most painful and most necessary, and because what happened during it is the reason I walked into that church in May. I drove to his apartment on a Wednesday evening, not an alternate weekend, not our scheduled time, a Wednesday of my own choosing, and I knocked on his door and he answered, and the expression on his face when he saw me was the specific expression of a father who is surprised and pleased and slightly alarmed by the unexpected appearance of his child on a Wednesday. He let me in. Diane was not there. We sat at his kitchen table, a different kitchen, not the yellow one, the apartment kitchen that was clean and neutral and had none of the specific emotional geography of the house where I had grown up. I tried to tell him. I want to say that I did it well and that the conversation went the way conversations in movies go when the right things are finally said between the right people. But I am 17 and I have been performing okay for 2 years, and the muscles required to stop performing, and say the real thing had atrophied in ways I did not fully understand until I was sitting across from my father trying to use them. What came out was not what I meant to say. What came out was something adjacent to it. Something about feeling like things had changed between us. Something about the wedding feeling fast. Something about wanting to make sure I still had a place in his life that was mine and not just adjacent to his new one. He heard me. I believe he heard me. He said the right things. He said I was his daughter and nothing changed that, and the wedding was not the end of what we were, and Diane was not a replacement for any part of what we had. He said I was his compass, and what I felt, sitting across from him, was the specific frustration of a real thing being met with a good answer that was not quite the right answer. Because the right answer would have required him to know what I was actually saying, and knowing what I was actually saying would have required the daily fluency we had lost. And we had lost that fluency in 2 years of alternate weekends and surface conversations, and my increasingly effective performance of okay. I drove home. I cried in the car, the whole 30-minute drive, And then I made a decision. The decision was not dramatic. It did not feel, in the moment I made it, like the kind of decision that produces the kind of mourning I am describing. It felt like the only thing left to do when the conversation has failed twice and the wedding is in 3 weeks, and the thing that needs to be said needs a room that is big enough to hold it. I was going to go to the wedding, not to stop it, not to make a scene in the way that scenes are made when people want to be noticed. I was going to go because my father was getting married and I was his daughter and I needed to be there. And because there was something I needed Diane Cooper to know before she became my stepmother. Something about the man she was marrying that she deserved to know and that I had been sitting with for 6 weeks and that she could not get from anyone else because I was the only one who had found the bank statement and understood what it meant. I needed Diane to know who my father actually was. Not the version of him I had been building for 2 years, the version that was too busy with his new life to maintain fluency in his daughter. The real version. The one who had been paying for my mother's cancer treatment for 8 months without telling anyone. I was going to give that version of my father to the woman who was about to marry him. And I was going to do it by walking up to her before the ceremony and telling her what I knew. I drove 61 miles on a Saturday morning in May. I wore a blue dress my mother had bought me for my cousin's graduation. My mother did not know I was going. I had not told her, partly because she would have talked me out of it, and partly because she was 3 weeks out from her final radiation treatment, and she was tired in the specific bone-level way of someone who has been fighting something large, and who is almost done fighting but not quite. And I was not going to add my complicated wedding situation to what she was carrying. I parked in the church parking lot at 10:15. The ceremony was at 11. I sat in the car for 20 minutes. I was not rehearsing. I knew what I was going to say. 6 words and the context that made them land correctly. I was doing something different. I was sitting with the full weight of what I was about to do, which was walk into my father's wedding uninvited and approach his bride and say something into her ear that would either change everything or change nothing. I got out of the car at 10:35. The church was Grace of the Morning Baptist, a beautiful stone building with wooden pews that had been in the Cascade neighborhood since before my grandmother was born. I knew this church. I had been baptized in this church. My grandmother's funeral had been in this church. My father was getting married in a building that had held some of the most significant moments of our family's history. That mattered to me. I walked through the side entrance, not the main doors where guests were arriving, the side entrance that leads to the corridor that runs alongside the sanctuary. I knew this building. I knew its geometry. I found Diane Cooper in the bridal preparation room. She was with her 2 bridesmaids and her mother. She was in her wedding dress, ivory, off-shoulder, beautiful. Her hair was up. She was having lipstick applied. Her expression was the specific, beautiful, anticipatory warmth of a woman on the morning of her wedding. Her bridesmaids saw me first, and their expressions shifted, not hostility. The specific, uncertain alertness of two people who recognize that someone has arrived who was not expected and who do not yet know how to read the situation. Diane looked at me. She said, "Imani." She said my name with the warmth she had always directed at me, unchanged by my arrival in a room I was not supposed to be in. This was the thing about Diane that I had spent 2 years not fully receiving. Her warmth toward me was real and consistent and had never wavered even during the periods when my performance of okay had thin places in it. I said, "I need to say something to you, just to you." Before the ceremony, her bridesmaids looked at each other. Diane looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at her bridesmaids and her mother and she said, "Could you give us just a minute?" They left. She turned back to me. She stood in her ivory wedding dress in the preparation room of the church where my grandmother's funeral had been, and she looked at me with the expression of a woman who understood that something significant was about to be said, and who was choosing to receive it with complete attention rather than with the defensiveness she might have been entitled to. I said, "I need to tell you something about my father before you walk out there." She said, "Tell me." And I told her, not just the 6 words, the whole thing, the bank statement in the kitchen drawer, the payment history, 8 months, the specific information that her husband-to-be had been quietly and without announcement paying for his ex-wife's cancer treatment because it was the right thing to do and because he was the kind of person who did the right thing whether anyone knew about it or not. I told her that I had spent 2 years building a version of my father in my head that was smaller than who he actually was. That I had been so deep in the grief of what had changed that I had stopped seeing what had not. That I had found the bank statement and spent 6 weeks understanding what it meant, and had arrived at the understanding that the man she was about to marry was someone I had underestimated, and that she deserved to walk into her marriage with that specific knowledge about him. She went still, not from shock, not from the kind of stillness that is emotional shutdown, the specific stillness of someone receiving something they did not expect and that is reorganizing something inside them. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was not grief. It was recognition. The specific expression of someone hearing something that confirms what they already knew in a way they had not been able to articulate. She said, "He told me about your mother, about the treatment. He asked me if I was okay with his contributing to the costs. He said she was the mother of his daughter and her health was his responsibility." I said, "He told you?" She said, "Yes, before we got engaged. He said he needed me to know who he was before I decided to be with him. He said the man I was choosing included that." I stood very still. She said, "Imani, I think you came here to give me something about your father that you needed to give, and I want you to know that I received it. But I think you also came here because you needed something from him that has been hard to ask for." I looked at her. She said, "I'm not trying to be your mother. I have never tried to be your mother and I never will. But I have been watching you for a year and a half and I have seen you performing okay in a way that is so practiced you might not even know you're doing it anymore. And I think you came here today because you needed someone in this building to stop accepting the performance." I said nothing. She said, "Your father is going to come find you in about 4 minutes when someone tells him you're here. And when he does, I want you to say the real thing, not the okay version, the real thing." I said, "How?" She said, "The same way you just said it to me. Just say it." This is the part of the story where the twist arrives. Not the Diane twist that is already in front of you, but the deeper one. The one that I have been building toward since I told you my father used to call me his compass. When my father came into that preparation room 4 minutes later, having been told by one of Diane's bridesmaids that his daughter had arrived and was with his bride, a sentence that must have produced an immediate and specific fear response. His face went through several things in quick succession when he saw me. He saw me in the blue dress from my cousin's graduation. He saw Diane's expression, composed and wet-eyed and warm. He saw whatever was on my face, which I cannot fully describe from the inside, but which I believe was the specific expression of a 17-year-old who has finally stopped performing okay. He said, "Imani, what's happening? Are you okay?" And because Diane was in the room and had just told me to say the real thing, and because she was right that I might not even know any more where the performance ended and the real thing started, I did the only thing I could do. I stopped performing. I said, "No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for 2 years, and I didn't know how to tell you because every time I tried the words came out wrong, and I thought you had stopped being able to hear me, and I found the bank statement in March, and I understood something about you that I had stopped understanding, and I came here because I needed you to know that I see you. I see who you actually are, and I need you to see me back." He crossed the room. He did not say anything. He put both arms around me in the specific way that parents hold their children when the holding is more important than any word that could be said. And I felt, in that embrace, something that I had not felt in 2 years. Not the performance of our relationship, but the substance of it. The actual thing underneath all the alternate weekends and the surface conversations and the engagement announcement in the truck. He held me for a long time. Then he said very quietly into my hair, "I see you, Imani. I have always seen you. I am so sorry I let you feel otherwise." He said, "You are my compass." That was never a line, that was always the truth. I said, "I know." And I did know. For the first time in 2 years, I actually knew. The wedding happened. I want to tell you that quickly and completely because some of you have been wondering, and the wondering is fair. The wedding happened, beautifully and on schedule, in the church where I was baptized and where my grandmother's funeral was held, and I sat in the front row on my father's side, not as the performed okay version of his daughter, but as his actual daughter, which turns out to occupy the same seat but feels completely different from the inside. Diane cried during the vows, not the pretty single-tear kind. The full kind, the kind that happens when something is completely real, and the reality of it is too large for the body to hold without releasing some of it. My father said his vows in the voice he uses when he means something completely, which I know because I have been listening to that voice my whole life, even when I could not hear it clearly. And watching him say those words to Diane with that voice was the specific, complicated, beautiful experience of a daughter watching her father be fully himself in a moment that belonged to him. I cried too, the full kind. Afterward, at the reception, my father found me at the edge of the dance floor where I was watching people I had known my whole life spin around in celebration, and he stood beside me and he said, "I need to ask you something." I said, "Ask it." He said, "How is your mother?" Not in the careful way of someone navigating a sensitive topic between divorced parents, in the direct way of someone who needed to know. I said, "She finished her last radiation treatment 11 days ago. Her oncologist says the outcomes look good. She is tired, but she is herself." He said, "Good. That is very good," I said. "She doesn't know I know you've been paying." He said, "I know. She asked me to keep it between us. But I want you to know something, Imani." I said, "Tell me." He said, "The reason I could pay was partly because of the divorce settlement structure and partly because of some financial decisions I made specifically to ensure I had the capacity to do it if it was ever needed. I have been making those decisions for 2 years. Because she is your mother and because you are my daughter and because protecting your mother is part of protecting you." I looked at him. He said, "I should have found a way to tell you that. Not the specific information that was your mother's to share, but the intention. I should have found a way to let you know that the man who moved out of the yellow kitchen was not a different man from the one who lived in it." I said, "I know that now." He said, "I should have made sure you knew it then. That is mine to carry." He said, "You are my compass. And a compass doesn't work if it's locked in a drawer. I locked you in a drawer for 2 years while I was managing my own loss, and I am sorry for that." I said, "I locked myself in too." He said, "We're going to fix that." I said, "Yes, we are." He extended his hand. I looked at it. I said, "I changed your diapers. I'm not shaking your hand." He laughed. The specific full laugh I had not heard in 2 years, the one that came from the same place as the real thing. I took his hand anyway. We danced. I want to tell you the broader thing now. The thing that is bigger than one wedding and one whispered sentence and one daughter who had been performing okay for 2 years. There is a specific kind of loneliness that lives in close proximity to love. Not the loneliness of distance, the loneliness of nearness. Of being in the same room as someone who loves you, and finding that the room has been rearranged in a way that makes full contact difficult. Of having a relationship with someone that used to be daily and fluent, and that has become scheduled and surface level without either of you deciding for that to happen. Of loving someone and being loved by them and still feeling, on alternate Saturdays, like a guest in the story of their life. That is the loneliness I carried for 2 years. And what I learned from finding the bank statement and going to that church and saying the real thing is this: the loneliness was real, and the love was also real. Both things were true simultaneously. And the path from the loneliness to the love was not through performing okay until someone noticed the performance was a performance. It was through saying the real thing to the right person in whatever room you find yourself in when you finally run out of the capacity to perform. I ran out of that capacity in a bridal preparation room on a Saturday morning in May. And what was on the other side of the capacity was my father's actual arms around me, which had been there the whole time. My mother is in remission. 3 months after the last radiation treatment, her oncologist used that word and my mother called me from her car in the parking lot of the treatment center. And I could hear in her voice the specific quality of someone releasing something they have been holding at extreme tension for 8 months. She cried on the phone, and I cried on the phone, and neither of us said very much because the word remission was doing all the saying that needed to be done. I told her about the wedding, not right away. A few weeks later, when we were doing dishes in the yellow kitchen, the ritual that has held every important conversation of our shared life, I told her I had gone. I told her what I had whispered to Diane. I told her what Diane had told me about my father having disclosed the treatment costs before their engagement, and what my father had said at the reception about making financial decisions specifically to ensure he had the capacity to help if it was needed. She listened the way she listens to things that matter, completely and without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me he would handle it. The first week of treatment, he called me and he said, 'Cynthia, I need you to not worry about the financial piece. I need you to use every piece of yourself to get through this. I will handle what I can handle.'" I said, "Why didn't you want me to know?" She said, "Because I needed you to be able to be angry at him if you needed to be angry at him. I needed you to have room for the complicated feelings about the divorce and the new relationship without the gratitude making it more complicated. I was trying to protect your freedom to feel what you felt." I said, "Mom." She said, "I know, it's too much protecting. Both of us were protecting you from too many things at the same time." I said, "And each other." She said, "Yes." "And each other." She said, "Are you okay?" "The real version." I said, "Yes." "The real version." For the first time in 2 years. She put her arm around me at the kitchen sink, the yellow walls around us and the fig tree in the backyard visible through the window, and we stood like that for a while in the specific warm completeness of a mother and daughter who have found their way back to the full truth of each other. Diane. I need to tell you about Diane in the months since the wedding because the story is not complete without the after. She did not become my mother. She was right that she was not trying to, and I was right that it was not what I needed. What she became is something for which I am still finding the right word. A specific kind of adult in my life who occupies the role that she occupies through her own consistency, rather than through any title or obligation, who shows up at my basketball games and brings the right snacks, and who said something to me on my last visit that I want to share because it belongs in this story. She said, "I knew who your father was when I married him, not because he told me everything, Because the things he did without telling anyone told me. I said, the treatment payments. She said, those, and other things, small things. The way he talks about your mother with respect even when it would be easier not to. The way he keeps the photograph of the three of you from when you were 6 on his nightstand, even though some people might find that strange. The way he still takes the long route when he drives past your old neighborhood because he told me once he does not want to stop knowing the shape of the place you grew up. I said, he still does that, she said, every time he is on that side of the city. He does not make a thing of it, he just takes the long route. I thought about that for a long time. The man who still takes the long route past the yellow kitchen. The compass that was never lost, just put in the wrong drawer for 2 years by both of us. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now. Hit that bell. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. Tell me if you have ever performed okay so well that you forgot what the not okay version of yourself felt like. Tell me if you have ever found a bank statement or a long route or a quiet payment that rearranged the picture you had been building of someone you loved. Drop a heart if you believe that performing okay is not the same as being okay. Drop a heart if you have ever been in the wrong drawer. Drop a heart if you have ever misjudged someone because the pain of missing them was easier to live in than the uncertainty of reaching for them. Drop a heart for my mother, who is in remission, who did the dishes with me after. Drop a heart for Diane, who cleared the room so I could say the real thing. Drop a heart for my father, who takes the long route past the yellow kitchen every time he is on that side of the city. Drop a heart for the compass that was never lost. Drop a heart for every daughter who ran out of the capacity to perform and found something better on the other side of it. This is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you. Next week on Black Diamonds, a woman who attended her mother's second wedding and discovered in the reception hall that the man her mother was marrying had a daughter her own age who had been told for 3 years that her father was a widower. What both daughters found when they finally talked to each other. What the mother found when she looked at the two of them together. And what was in the letter that the first wife, who was not dead, had written 6 years ago and that the daughter had been carrying in her bag for every day of those 6 years. That story is coming. Make sure your notifications are on, because the letter changes everything about what every person in that room thought they understood. Until then, this is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you.